Before I get into it, I just want to say cameras are tools, and I know that YouTube can get a little bit toxic about gear reviews and fanboyism. So I just wanted to say this is not a video to try and stir up some like that. Cameras are tools, and if you need to hammer a nail, then you need to buy a hammer, not a screwdriver. So obviously a lot of the reasons that I'm going to give you probably or maybe don't matter to you because you have different use cases for a camera. Here are the reasons why I am still sticking to the Sony ecosystem and the things that I still love about my FX3 that I don't think many other cameras, if at all, can match those things that I care about. However, I'm also going to talk about the features that I'm super jealous of when it comes to other camera brands, specifically Lumix, and the kind of features that I want out of Sony cameras in the future, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 years, that if they don't give those features, I think I might actually switch to Lumix then. But right now, I think I'm happy where I'm at, and I'm gonna give you the reasons why. The first reason is actually a big one. So the Lumix camera that actually caught my attention a lot, that I really like, is the Lumix S1 Mark II. But here's one of the problems. Look, I make a full-time living off of the system that I already have, the cameras and lenses that I already have. This pays my rent and more. This literally makes sure I have a secure future. So in order for me to switch or consider switching ecosystems, I have to try out that ecosystem first. So let's say in this case, it's the Lumix S1 Mark II. The issue is I can't find it anywhere in Toronto. I live in Toronto. I can't find it anywhere for rent. I looked at Visteg, 2D House, Ontario Camera Rentals, and a bunch of other websites that I tried to search it up on Google. I tried ChatGPT. I found no place where I could actually rent the Lumix S1 Mark II in Toronto. I don't live in the middle of nowhere. The truth is, if I can't use a camera, try it, and do the tests that I want to do with it and see that I actually like it, then that right there is a big enough barrier that's going to keep me from switching. And none of my colleagues have it, none of my friends have it, or friends of friends. I don't know anybody in my personal or professional life that has ever held that camera, and I can't find it anywhere to rent yet. I know it's only been announced for about, I think, like 2 or 3 months at this point, but it's kind of one of the problems with Lumix is there's less market share, which takes me to the next point actually, is brand popularity. Unfortunately, I don't want this to be the case, but the majority of videographers and DPs, at least where I live, or at least given the kind of work that I do, corporate and light doc work, the majority of those people shoot on either Sony or Canon. Sony for the most part. If you're being hired by a DP as a second or a third shooter and you happen to be shooting in the same ecosystem that they are, they're just more likely to hire you than somebody else who's not using the same gear. Whether I like that or not, it's just the name of the game, and I've been hired a lot of times simply because the DP already has an FX6 or an FX9 or a Burano or just a bunch of other FX3s and A7 IVs. I see that way more often than a DP just having Panasonic gear. I haven't seen that in a really long time. And so as much as I don't like it, brand popularity is a thing. Like even if you think about it, like if I were a DP and I have Sony gear and I have an option between a videographer who looks talented and looks like they have a good portfolio, and I have another one who also has a good portfolio, but one shoots on Sony and the other shoots on Canon, I'm probably gonna hire the Sony person because the colors are gonna be identical, we're gonna be shooting with the same log profile, all of our lenses are interchangeable. If each of us have to operate each other's cameras at different times in the day, we can both do that very easily because we know the cameras. Things are just going to be way smoother when all of your cameras are matched as close as possible. The third reason is lens ecosystem and also camera ecosystem, but more so about the lenses. The thing is with lenses, not only do you have more options, not just from the main manufacturers, like Sony just has more lenses in their collection than Lumix, but there's also way more third-party lenses that are also not on Lumix. And these kinds of options, especially the money-saving ones, really make sense for somebody like me who's trying to invest into an ecosystem rather than just one camera and one lens. Let's take a look at a few examples. Actually, I'll show you this in action. I'm going to go to B&H and I'm going to talk you through different examples of lenses that I'm thinking about getting and lenses that I know I'm going to need to get later in the future, and what kind of options I would have as a Lumix user versus as a Sony user, and why this kind of thing matters. So just to give you a little backstory, I'm starting to do more and more kind of corporate events and conferences and that kind of stuff, where there's a lot of instances where I need to have a bunch of cameras set up shooting a podium or a bunch of speakers, and I'd like at least 2 angles so that it's not just one camera that I'm cutting back to. And then also I have my FX3 on a gimbal, and then I could just take some random B-roll with that. But I'd like at least 2 cameras where they're shooting with a telephoto lens. Right now I actually have a manual old telephoto lens. It's a 70-200 f4.5. That one is okay, it's doing the job, it's soft. It's not a sharp lens and it doesn't have autofocus. But if I wanted another lens, or if I wanted to replace that one with 2 telephoto lenses, I'd need some sort of a 70-200, and preferably I'd like it to be f2.8 for multiple reasons. Now, if I wanted to do that on the Lumix side of things, I'd only have 2 options for f2.8 telephoto lenses. I would either have the Sigma 70-200 f2.8 for $1650. This is B&H, so that's USD. Or I would have the Leica, which is $3,500 USD. Now, I'm not paying $3,500 USD for that Leica lens. Even the Sony G Master Mark II is $3,000. But the other option that exists is the Sigma 70-200 f2.8, and that one is $1650. Way more reasonable, great option, but I don't have $3,000 USD to spare for 2 telephoto lenses. So do I have another option? Well, for Lumix, I wouldn't. But for Sony, I'd have the Tamron 70-180 for $1,100. So that's a $550 difference from the Sigma. So if I'm buying 2 lenses for the 2 camera angles that I need it for, then that's gonna save me $1,100. And I don't really mind losing the extra 20 millimeters because I'm likely going to be using this on an A7 IV or an FX30. That's APS-C, and with that extra crop, you're basically at around the 300 millimeter point at this point, and then it's totally fine. It's more than enough for my uses. So here's like a telephoto lens that's f2.8 and it has image stabilization, and it's $1,100. If I was in the Lumix world, sure, the cameras are usually a little bit less expensive than Sony cameras, but the lenses, there's just way more options to pick from to save money. So lenses save you a bunch of money, and that really adds up, especially if you have 2 or 3 cameras and you want to kind of cut back. Okay, so that was the telephoto lens example. Let's move on to another one. What if I wanted an 85mm f1.4? Something that it's a high quality lens. It will last for a long time because you could use it for a lot of different things. An 85mm is great for portraits and weddings and for interviews, of course. It just gives you beautiful compression and bokeh. If I wanted an 85mm f1.4 and I had a Lumix, the only option that I would have is a Sigma for $1,320 USD. Now, don't get me wrong, Sigma lenses are freaking amazing, but first of all, Lumix doesn't even make a lens like this. With Sony, there's way more options. First of all, there's the Sony one, which is more expensive because it's a G Master Mark II, but if you want to splurge out, there's that option. And then on the other end of things, obviously you could still get the Sigma if you want that. It also exists for Sony. And then there's also a Viltrox 85mm f1.4 for $600. That is such a steal. Like, even if you watch the reviews on this lens, the autofocus is super usable. The image is pretty decent. Like, it's probably not gonna be as good as the G Master, but there's an option for me that costs basically the same amount of money. Like, you know what? If I go to Lumix and do Lumix 85mm f1.8, if I ignore the sale price, I ignore the fact that it was originally $600 and right now it's on sale for $447 or $450, you would only be saving $150 and you'd be getting a cheaper f1.8 lens kind of like a nifty 50. Whereas as a Sony user, whenever I get an 85mm, which I've been thinking about getting it for a long time, because I really want it for interviews, especially f1.4, it would look really creamy. But I don't want to spend 1320 USD on the Sigma, because for me as a Canadian, that's basically dropping $2,000 on a lens. I have this alternative where I can drop $1,000, including tax and the USD to Canadian conversion. We're talking about less than half the price, this versus the Sigma. That's just an option that doesn't exist with Lumix. So for anybody that says lens ecosystems don't matter, I'm sorry, they do. But look, if you're the type of person that only needs 1 or 2 lenses for your kind of work, like if you're like, I only do interviews and I just need a 50 and an 85 for my A and B cam, and that's all I care about, well then it doesn't really matter, right? And if you're just gonna spend the money on these lenses and then live with them for the rest of your, that's fine. But for somebody like me, I'm shooting interviews, sometimes I'm shooting conferences or weddings or construction videos or videos where I'm shooting hockey players on the ice for like product shoots and stuff like that. All of these different uses require different types of lenses, and the more lenses that I need, right, that's more money that I'm paying out of pocket for this equipment. If I can save anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per lens, that's like a lot of money saved. So, and then there's also like specialty lenses that are super niche, but still a lot of people swear by them. They're expensive lenses for a reason that just don't exist on Lumix. Like for example, the Sony 28 to 70mm f2. Canon had this lens for like 4 years now actually, and then Sony finally made one last year. But it's an example of something that you have an option for. If you need a standard zoom at f2, this looks beautiful. So there's a lot of areas and scenarios where just being in the ecosystem of Sony gives me way more options for whichever lens focal length I'm looking for, and the options all differ in quality and size and price range so that I could just pick and choose. Whereas with other, like with Canon, this is even worse because you're tied to just either RF glass, or you have to buy an adapter for each of your cameras and use EF lenses. I don't like to do that. I just want to keep things simple. All the lenses work on all of my cameras with no adapters, and it could be a cheap $200 lens or a $3,000 lens that just came out today. It doesn't matter whether I'm using it on an A6000 from 15 years ago, APS-C, and small and light and crappy, or whether I'm using it on a Burano, the same lenses work everywhere. So that kind of interconnectability and the sheer options, the amount of lenses that exist, it's hard to beat. Also, when it comes to lenses, it's not just that I'm saving money by, let's say, buying the Tamron instead of the Sigma. It's not just that. It's also that lenses in general have a longer shelf life than cameras. Like when I buy this Tamron, because I think I'm gonna buy it within the next 6 to 12 months because I'm doing more kind of work that needs telephoto lenses. But when I do, it's gonna outlast my cameras. I'm probably gonna use it for the next few years on the FX3 and A7 IV, but then when I upgrade those cameras, and usually when I upgrade, I sell the old stuff so that I can use some of that money to be able to afford the new stuff. You know, if I upgrade, for example, to the A7 IV in the next few years, those same lenses are gonna work perfectly on them, and they're gonna carry on for years afterwards. So not only am I saving money on those lenses, but the lenses in general are important to think about as a long-term thing because they're supposed to have a longer shelf life. Now, the other reason why I'm sticking is this is specifically about the FX3 and FX30 rather than just all Sony cameras, just like the cinema type mirrorless cameras. The reason why I like them is no chance of overheating. I know for a lot of people, this might not matter. Like if you're shooting in studio all day, you're not gonna care about hot weather outside, obviously. If you're shooting short clips or non-high frame rate stuff, totally fine. Like you don't need a camera that can shoot for hours in the heat. Doesn't matter to you. For me, I actually shoot a lot of stuff in the heat. Even though I live in Toronto, which gets really cold in the winter, it's like -20, but in the summer, There's days where it easily reaches 35 Celsius. I don't know, what is that in Fahrenheit for you American folk? 35 C to F, 95. So yeah, I've had a lot of shoots in these kind of weather conditions, construction videos, weddings. Believe it or not, a lot of people scheduled their weddings in the summer here in Canada. And if they planned out that they're going out to shoot some photos at a park, then guess what? We're gonna be outside at a park for like an hour or an hour and a half with the groomsmen, their bridesmaids, and maybe even family members, and we're gonna be taking photos and videos. I've been through so many of these situations. Again, construction videos. I hate them, but they bring good money, and sometimes they want slow-mo stuff. They want 4K 120. I've done 4K 120 shoots for construction videos out in 30 or 35 Celsius weather for hours. And the clips that I shoot aren't just 10 seconds long. No, sometimes I'm filming, let's say, a construction worker doing an activity for 3 or 4 minutes. And I'm not just gonna keep cutting and recording and cutting and recording, because what if he does something that I really wanted, right? And I missed it, right? So I'm just gonna hit record and I follow the action for like 4 minutes while I'm sweating, okay? But I never have to worry about overheating ever. I don't want that to even be a possibility. I don't even want to have to think about it. There was another few shoots that I did a couple years back where I filmed go-karting events. I think the events went on for like 4.5 or 5 hours. And again, it was like 30, 35 Celsius in Toronto. I did 4K 120 for it because they wanted to do cool edits where it's like speed ramps and slowing down and speeding up. And I actually did those kind of shoots even before I had the FX3 as well with my Panasonic GH5. Yes, I used to be a GH5 user for like 3.5 years. So the GH5 did that just fine. I did it in 4K 60. On the FX3, I did it in 4K 120 with no issues. And I do know that some of the newer Lumix cameras, if you're doing prolonged 4K 120, at least on the SD cards, while you had the normal battery plugged in, that there's potential for overheating. I don't want that potential. I don't even want to think about it. Now, the reason why I'm okay with my B cam not being an overheating beast, the A7 IV, is because I don't need that kind of stuff out of it. On that B cam, obviously it can't even do 4K 120, and 4K 60 has an APS-C crop, so it's not even using the full sensor, and so I'm usually not using it for that. I'm usually just doing 4K 24, and because it has the battery grip, I've never seen it overheat, even in hot conditions. But for the FX3 at least, I don't even think there's an option for a grip, and I don't want to have to use a grip. I want to be able to keep it as small as possible if needed, and still not have it overheat. So overheating in 4K 120 for long shoots is something that matters to me. It probably doesn't matter for 95% of people, but to me it does. Now here's another thing that I really like about the FX3 that I think it's just the FX3 and FX30 that have this ability and feature, and no other camera does. And it's the top handle and audio unit. Now, right off the bat, let me just admit to you, the top handle itself, the quality of it sucks. It's cheap plastic. But once you put on the additional small rig extension handle things, and also this top part, it becomes really solid, actually. It's really nice. And I haven't had issues with it for the past 4 years that I've been using it. And here's why I really, really love this. First of all, I don't think there's any mirrorless camera on the market other than the FX3 and 30 and FX2, I think, right? That allow you to have a top handle and XLR inputs at the same time. Now, if you're a new videographer or if you don't really deal with audio a lot, to you this might seem like a stupid reason. To me, it's not. I like the ability to have clean scratch audio, and for that I use a boom mic, an MKE 600 Sennheiser mic. I put it in right there, and I connect it via XLR, and it gives me two sides, two separate recordings of that one mic, basically stereo. Left side is louder than the right side, so that I have both to edit with. If it clips, I can recover it. And then additionally, you can mount a monitor on it, or at the very top here, I can mount a timecode box on it. And maybe right next to it, I'll have the Hollyland mic that I just got recently. I made a video about it. Even with all of these things, I still have a top handle that I can use. So this is like the perfect documentary handheld rig for me, where it's super simple. You don't have to rig out the entire camera. You could just put this on the camera itself, and you don't need anything else. You don't need rails or a sidearm. But basically, any other camera, what you'd have to do is buy this audio unit separately. But it's the kind of audio unit that just connects right to your hot shoe mount, but it prevents you from using a top handle. But then if you buy a third-party top handle and put that into the shoe mount or the cage, well then now you can't use the audio module. But with this, you can have both. You can have a top handle, more places where you can mount stuff, more audio options, and it's all in one. And it comes with a camera. So when it comes to getting 4 tracks of audio into your camera and have it be a usable handheld rig, it's just something that's really cool. And if you want, you can take it off, and now you have a small mirrorless camera. This makes it so that you don't even have to upgrade to an FX6 style camera just to get XLRs. Well, you have this right here. It's just a small little top handle with XLR inputs, and you're done. Okay, those were the reasons why I'm still sticking with the FX3 and the A7 IV and just Sony in general, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. However, if within the next, let's say, 2.5 or 3 years, if they don't give me the following list of features, I'm probably gonna switch to Lumix. Here are the features that I'm super jealous of when it comes to Lumix cameras, and other cameras too. Some other cameras have those features that I'm about to list. Number 1 on the list for me, personally, would be open gate. And for me, that reason is because I do a lot of vertical and square content for my full-time job and my freelance clients sometimes. Having the ability to have just more pixels vertically so that I don't have to frame for it while I'm shooting, it's just such a nice thing to be able to do. Especially in this day and age where we're doing a lot of social media content for Instagram and YouTube Shorts and all that kind of stuff. We need the ability to be able to get vertical content without having to choose between, should I shoot this vertically or horizontally, or should I zoom out my lens more than I'd like to, just so that I can fit the person into the markers on the LCD screen. Just open gate, please. And then of course, the other reason for open gate, it doesn't really matter for me as much, but for a lot of people, is anamorphic shooting. Because anamorphic lenses are getting more and more affordable, even when we're talking about full frame lenses. And some of them even have autofocus. And for the ones that don't, you can use LiDAR focus for them. So there's a lot of innovations coming out that are making anamorphic shooting more and more accessible. And to be able to hop on that train, if you give open gate, that's gonna make those anamorphic lenses way more usable. Now, something else that I would want is a higher resolution to be able to shoot in. Now, I personally don't really care at all about 8K. I think 8K is overkill for 99% of situations. As a matter of fact, I've never been asked directly to ever export a video in 4K. I just do it myself. I edit in 4K and I send the client 4K exports, but clients don't even ask for 4K exports. Sometimes when they ask for specific specs for me to shoot in, I've only been asked to shoot in 4K. I've never been asked to shoot 6K, let alone 8K. However, that's in 2025. And I'd imagine in 2027 or 2028, things are probably gonna be different. 6K is gonna be way more of a standard to shoot in, still not to output to. 2K and 4K output is gonna be standard for a long time. But 6K capture is gonna be standard in a couple of years, if not, it's already standard now. Or even just anything more than 4K. I'd even be happy with 5K. Just a little bit more than 4K so that I have the ability to warp stabilize, do a minor crop, and still output to 4K with no quality loss. All right, the other thing that I would really want, this is not a deal breaker for me because I probably wouldn't use this feature like 99% of the time for my kind of work, but I want the option, and that is anything more than 10-bit internally. Give us some flavor of RAW, because every manufacturer is doing this now. Obviously, Blackmagic's been doing it for like the past century. You know, Blackmagic, was it maybe the first camera that was able to shoot internal 12-bit RAW with the original Blackmagic Pocket, right? Small, tiny camera shooting RAW. But no, nowadays it's Nikon and Canon and Lumix. They're all shooting RAW internally. So give us some RAW, or even just a 12-bit file. If it's like not technically raw or whatever, I don't care, just something a little bit more robust than 10-bit. That way you wouldn't even have to rely on a Ninja 5 or a Blackmagic Assist or anything like that. Okay, another thing that I would really like is waveforms. And if you're feeling generous, false color, but I personally use waveforms more often, especially if I have my Ninja V with me and I'm shooting on a gimbal or whatever. Usually I have the waveform opened up in the corner of the screen, and it just feels more intuitive for me to use that than the histogram or zebras or any of that kind of stuff. And just, you know, in general, care more about video specific features. Like Lumix had waveforms for the past like 10 years. Again, I used to be a Panasonic GH5 user for 3.5 years, and I always had the little waveform open because I loved it. It was my favorite way of judging exposure. Another thing that I would want out of Sony, and they kind of did this recently, but I want them to do it more, is you should go ham on firmware updates. You should update the firmware as much as possible and actually give us features that people have been asking for or trying to push the limitations of what the camera can do, hopefully. They did this recently again with the external B-RAW update. This is really nice, but it would have been great to have that before. Maybe if there's a way to record OpenGate through a firmware update. I mean, I don't even know if that's possible, but like 3:2 aspect ratio or anything like an APS-C mode, maybe just something. And more importantly, make sure your firmware updates don't brick cameras or don't cause the Bluetooth to stop functioning, because that's a whole other thing, but I made another video on that you can watch. All right, then the last thing I think that I would want out of the next whatever iteration of the FX3 would be, at least slightly better IBIS. See, the thing with IBIS is I'm kind of particular about the way it looks. For example, I don't like how Canon IBIS looks, where it's wobbly on the sides. You know what I mean? I think Lumix looks the best, obviously. I think that's like a pretty well-known thing now. But the thing is, I don't really want the IBIS to be too aggressive, not just because of the wobbly corners thing, but because of a specific pet peeve of mine, lens flares and light bloom. If I'm filming a shot and there's a lens flare, it doesn't even have to be an aggressive lens flare. It could be a normal one. If I have IBIS off, you'll notice that the lens flare shake is identical and looks consistent with how the camera is shaky, right? But the problem is once you turn on IBIS, or especially to like a more aggressive form of IBIS, like active stabilization instead of standard stabilization on the Sony, then what you'll see is the footage itself, the clip itself becomes less shaky and more of the jitters go away, but the jitters on the lens flare stay. So what you'll get is a stable shot with a jittery lens flare. And the more aggressive your IBIS is, or even your warp stabilization in post, then the more aggressive that lens flare shake is gonna look in comparison to how smooth the footage is. So I love IBIS, but maybe like just make the active stabilization more aggressive, but keep the standard stabilization more standard and less aggressive, so that if I wanna control the shake myself, like putting the camera on a gimbal, I can just have standard stabilization on. But if I'm handheld, I can have active stab on and it would be a little more aggressive, so that at least there's an option. But I don't like a highly aggressive IBIS because I don't want these artifacts to come up. I don't want wobble on the sides if I can help it. But in general, make your IBIS a little better because it's a little bit falling behind almost everybody. And yeah, those are the reasons why I'm sticking with Sony, and the things that I really want out of the next Sony cameras, that if they don't give it, or if they don't even give half of it, I'm probably gonna switch. But not now, not yet, because like I showed in this video, there's still a lot of good reasons for why I'm sticking with Sony, but within the next few years, they're gonna have to push the envelope on their cameras because, like, dude, most cameras are shooting 6K internally. Most cameras are shooting RAW internally. Can you at least, you know, give us something? Give us OpenGate,